Bitcoin just came within inches of its previous all-time high, but rejected massively. We are now at a crucial support level, but we also have some important levels down below, which we may find support at. In today's video, we'll be talking about exactly this, going over the recent Bitcoin price action, talking about my most recent Bitcoin trade, which I continue to take profits on the way up, and of course, taking a look at Ethereum against Bitcoin and the rest of the market. If you enjoy the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So first of all, as per usual, taking a look at Bitcoin. What do you see here? A massive wick to 122.4K. Now, as you know, if you've been following the channel, I have been in a Bitcoin long for quite some time, and on the way up, I continued to take profits. I actually took profits right above $121,000, and Bitcoin made it above 122K and then started coming down. Currently, the realized P&L of this position is around $36,000, and the unrealized P&L is around $34,000. So we'll have to see how this develops, but right now you can see that we did get a massive rejection on Bitcoin. Now I want you to pay attention to this, the CME gap. We don't always fill them immediately, but right now you can see that today we already started tapping into this gap. Now, the bottom of this gap is actually found right around 117.4K, and so if we were to fill it, it would look something like this, where we could potentially go ahead and find support at those levels. And I'm not sure what the exact statistic is, but supposedly around 95% of Bitcoin CME gaps do get filled. And so I would be expecting Bitcoin to fill this at some point. The thing is, since we came down so aggressively, there's a higher likelihood that we can go ahead and fill it sooner rather than later, which in my opinion is actually positive, because a lot of us were worried around here when Bitcoin established this previous CME gap, because it took so long to chop around above that level and then come back lower, and then we filled it, came right back up. So can Bitcoin just fill this CME gap and then go ahead and move higher? Will it really be that simple? We'll have to see how things develop, because right now we are at a crucial level for Bitcoin, and we actually just now, as I'm recording this video, tapped into the point of control of this range, which of course always gives us some very strong bounces. Actually, if you're in my premium group, I would have sent a trade setup if I wasn't recording this video right now, but you can see that right here we got a pretty nice bounce thus far on the 1 hour time frame. Now we'll have to see if this ends up just being a wick, but so far I like what I'm seeing for Bitcoin in terms of getting a bounce at this level for a quick scalp. So on the 12-hour time frame, to zoom out, we did hit a lot of our take profit points that we've been talking about on the channel since being vocally bullish at the lows around $112,000. Of course, we'd like Bitcoin to be up only, but I wouldn't be surprised if we come back lower into the CME gap and then maybe even come back into this wedge, which we've been covering on the channel at length. So you have to keep your mind open to that possibility, because if we can't go ahead and make a new all-time high, and ultimately we just went ahead and grabbed all of this liquidity, which we know we've been covering on the channel, that there's been a ton of liquidity right at that range. On the liquidation heat maps, we saw so much between 120 and 122K, and I said it was highly likely that we would go there. If this is just to grab that liquidity and we're going to come back lower, it's going to be devastating for crypto market participants. That being said, I want you to also pay attention to this. When Bitcoin popped up from the bottom of the range and held this area as support, it had a little bit of indecision, holding the value area low and being between the point of control. This is actually when altcoins were outperforming. And so if you're a little bit patient here, assuming Bitcoin does fill that CME gap, and let's say we come back lower to around 117.4K, which is the bottom of the CME gap as we just covered, and we start chopping around here, and we continue to chop around, the more that we would chop around these levels, the more we would see altcoins likely outperform Bitcoin, with of course Ethereum continuing to lead the way. Because if we take a look at the ETH Bitcoin chart, despite the recent correction, it is still green on the weekly as we kick off this week. And so right now, ETH is still showing some pretty remarkable performance. But this also means that Bitcoin dominance likely continues to increase compared to the other altcoins. And that has been my base case. Because if we zoom in here on the daily, we are now back above the 60% level for Bitcoin dominance. And I do think that we could be seeing this soar higher in the next few weeks. Obviously, when we have a kind of move like this, where we just dump, everyone will be calling for altcoin season, a little bit prematurely in my opinion, but that's besides the point. I think that we will continue to likely stay around these levels before Bitcoin dominance maybe makes a new run for the highs. This all while Ethereum against Bitcoin does see a little bit of a higher low. But right now, we cannot neglect this outperformance. And so, if Bitcoin doesn't go ahead and just crash aggressively to the bottom of this range, which isn't my base case at this current moment, then we will likely see a period of consolidation once this dump is over, and that's when altcoins can actually outperform. In those few days, I will probably be entering a lot of leveraged altcoin trades as we expect some outperformance from altcoins and for Bitcoin dominance to probably trickle on a little bit lower before Bitcoin makes its next big move. I hope that makes sense. If you want to know my exact trade setups and how I'm navigating this market, for example, you could have entered this Bitcoin long trade with me where we yielded just under $70,000 in profits as I'm recording this video. You do have that first link in my description down below. Click the Telegram link here and DM me the word premium, and I would be happy to onboard you into my free premium group. Again, that is the first link in my description down below. Now back to the chart. As I said, consolidation is ultimately positive for altcoins, but I still think that at this point, the fact that we already touched the top of the CME gap, it's highly likely that we will at least come back lower and fill that gap, because around 95% of Bitcoin CME gaps do go ahead and get filled, and we're already so close. So what's a few extra $1,000 to fill that gap? Now, the next things I want you to pay attention to, I have to keep bringing this chart up because, as you know, a lot of you have been giving me flack about not going into altcoins quite yet. First of all, I think Bitcoin dominance is not quite done and we will likely have another big move. But second of all, a lot of my spot position is also in Ethereum since we hit those lows that we covered on the channel, touching back into 2019. And so I'm in a relatively stress-free position, spot positions in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I need to bring up this chart again, unfortunately, because if you've been watching my videos, I've been covering this at length, but it seems like every single time that I go ahead and take a look at how others are doing against Ethereum, the altcoin market against ETH, you can see that it continues to get redder and redder. And so at this point, it still makes sense to hold Ethereum. It's Ethereum season, not altcoin season. And we can see this whenever Bitcoin has a pullback because Ethereum still remains relatively strong. But taking a look at the collective altcoin market against Bitcoin, you can see that this is now a red candle. And my base case here is that we will likely be moving lower, especially for the rest of the altcoin market against Bitcoin. As I always have to say, if Bitcoin goes up, altcoins will also go up. And at this point, since we got a bounce from the low for ETH Bitcoin, ETH would likely move higher. However, the rest of the altcoin market is not in the same boat quite yet, in my opinion, and I think we will still see ETH continue to outperform. Now, there will be pullbacks on this chart, on the ETH Bitcoin chart, and I want you to pay attention to this because, as I said a few videos ago, if we do get some kind of significant pullback, let's say back to the 0.03 level, that could be a pretty good long for the ETH Bitcoin pair, which if you'd like to trade that pair, you have the second link in my description down below bringing you directly to Bluffin. They have the ETH Bitcoin pair. You can trade it with leverage as well, but ultimately that's what I would be looking at for ETH Bitcoin. A higher low before we go ahead and move higher. I'm content with my capital in ETH and Bitcoin. And if we take a look at the Bitcoin exchange liquidation map, I have to bring this to your attention because as we were covering this chart in yesterday's video, there was still a lot of liquidity, around $120,000 to $122,000. Way more shorts in the market, as I said. Now you can see that there's actually way more longs in the market. And it's very interesting to see how the market can shift so quickly after grabbing that liquidity to the upside. And so right now, I still think that it's more than likely that Bitcoin goes ahead and fills that CME gap and liquidates a lot of those late aggressive longs as we've been discussing on the channel. So right here on the left, there's around 12.18 billion worth of cumulative long liquidation leverage. And on the right here, you can see that there is under 8 billion worth of cumulative short liquidation leverage since we liquidated all of those shorts between 120 and 122.5K. Let's see what happens, but right now, I still am leaning that we will probably move a little bit lower here, at the very least to fill that CME gap. Now, what are the next levels? What happens if we go ahead and fill the CME gap and we don't bounce? Well, at that point, we may need to consider that we will just continue to be range bound. Now, if you've been subscribed to the channel for a while, you also know that I think we will likely have some kind of correction for Bitcoin and the global crypto market along with the stock market sometime near the end of August, to September. The reason being, seasonality would suggest that it's not the best period for stocks and crypto. Now, if you take a look at Bitcoin in the post-halving years, you can see that every single August has actually been green for Bitcoin. And so this is important for you to consider because we will likely close August in the green if this is to repeat itself. That being said though, on average, September is the only red month for Bitcoin. On average, that is. And so I would be expecting Bitcoin to likely make another move lower, shaking out the rest of the market. We will probably also see Bitcoin dominance increase massively at that point in time before the final leg higher of this bull market cycle. So what does that look like on the charts? First of all, we need to make a new all-time high. Otherwise, maybe Bitcoin just continues to chop around within this zone until we actually get a new low below $112,000, and then we end up coming back up for the last leg higher. If we are to properly confirm below the CME gap, I will likely shave off some more profits from my Bitcoin long trade just to de-risk, because you never know, and we could easily find our way back below and back in the Bitcoin range, which we would not want to see. But as I said, if we hold in this range for a few days, and let's say, for example here, this would be my base case. If Bitcoin were to just move around here, around this one zone, which is another liquidity zone that we highlighted on the chart, and we stay here and we don't confirm lower, then at that point, we could see a few days where altcoins do outperform Bitcoin, which would give you some pretty solid scalping opportunities. A reminder there, if you want to trade the crypto markets, you have all the links in the description down below. You have Bluffin, you have Weeks, and they have some fantastic bonuses. Now, I want to wrap up this video with a little bit of caution. Now, the caution here is when you start to see posts like this. Hear me out. I'm not saying that the cycle is over. In fact, I still think that we have one more last leg higher. But when you start to see a lot of posts like this, you should be getting a little bit worried. Why ETH is going to $80,000? Institutions buying billions in ETH, billions in ETF inflows. Genius Act equals stablecoins, trillions. Large companies launching layer 2s, stock market going on-chain, Vitalik still washes his clothes with his hands. Like if you agree, retweet if you're bullish. 7,000 likes on this tweet. Are you serious right now? And if you're a trader, this is what you're competing with. Imagine thinking that Ethereum will be going to $80,000. Another post here, Joe Lubin says, ETH will flip Bitcoin. If you've been in the bull market cycles before, if you've been in crypto before, you'll remember the flippening. ETH against Bitcoin, ETH will finally flip the market cap of Bitcoin. Not a chance. And every time that we get some kind of bullish price action for ETH, we hear these kinds of narratives. Tom Lee says ETH will be the next Bitcoin. Then we have the CEO of NVIDIA saying that ETH is quite valuable. Nothing wrong with that statement. It is quite valuable. But honestly, when you start to see things like this, and people saying, for example, that we will just infinitely go up, it's time to be worried. The more and more posts that you see like these two, the more that you should be cautious in this market. Again, I'm not calling for the top of the market, but I am saying that we are definitely approaching the latter stages. For example, Toby Cunningham here, I really like his point of view. I'm hearing that the 4-year cycle is no longer valid and we are about to go on a multi-year bull market. I don't know who needs to hear this, but this is the type of talk that happens near the top of bull markets. This is one major reason why most won't make a cent this bull market cycle. Couldn't agree more with this. Always make sure that you're turning those unrealized profits into realized profits, whether you're leverage trading or whether you're just holding for your spot portfolio. Remember, in the bear market, it can be absolutely brutal for altcoins. So if you're up significantly, it's never a bad idea to take profits when we're on these crazy uptrends. Because remember, it's very easy to let those emotions get the best of you when everyone is euphoric. You may not feel it now, but when it really happens, it's hard to control yourself. Just a piece of advice. And the last thing I want to show you, which I thought was relatively interesting, to reiterate my point that the cycle isn't over, bull market peak indicators, sell at the top. Right now it's showing hold 100%. None of the historical indicators have been flashing, and so yes, the top is not in my opinion. And Michael Saylor actually accumulated Just 155 Bitcoins around $116,000. He always accumulates at much higher valuations, and we're talking the billions, but whenever we get a little bit of a dip, he doesn't buy aggressively. So it's very interesting to see this, but 155 Bitcoins, who cares about that, right? Yeah, right, I'd like to have that in my wallet. And that sums up today's quick market update. I think that Bitcoin will likely go ahead and fill this CME gap, and this correction was a little bit overdue since we got a massive bounce from the 112K region. Now that was the previous all-time high. We were always expecting some kind of bounce there, and if you've been following me on the channel, you know that I was vocally bullish at that point in time. Right now we wicked to 122.4K. Can we make a new all-time high? Only time will tell. We'll have to see the reaction when we get deeper into the CME gap. Again, this could take a few days to play out, so let's see what happens. The last time we set that CME gap, we hovered over it for over a couple of weeks. If we see a little bit of consolidation here for Bitcoin, it's at that point in time where altcoins will likely have their time in the sun and they could probably outperform. Let's see what happens. If you enjoy the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe, and I will make sure to keep you updated in tomorrow's video.